My husband sold me across a dinner table, and he did it in a language he thought I'd never understand. 17 years of marriage, and Marcus still didn't know the woman sitting across from him had spent 4 years in Lisbon and 2 more in Bogota. Close enough to boardrooms full of men who spoke exactly like this. Men who believed a woman's silence meant she understood nothing at all. He raised his glass to a stranger that night and said the words that ended us right there under the chandelier of a restaurant he'd chosen, because he thought it would impress everyone but me. My name is Elena. I'm 42, and until that night, I thought I knew exactly who my husband was. Marcus had been planning this dinner for weeks. The rooftop restaurant at the Ashford Hotel in Boston, white tablecloths, a wine list he'd memorized just to look effortless. He told me it was the most important night of his career. Diego Molina, a private investor with more money than patience, was deciding whether to put $18 million behind a medical distribution project Marcus had been chasing for almost 2 years. Summit Health Devices needed this deal. Marcus needed it more. 3 days before, he'd bought me a dress. Deep navy, the kind of expensive that makes you hold your breath when you check the tag. For one foolish second, I thought it was a gesture of love. Then he handed it to me and said, "Don't talk too much tonight." Diego likes elegant women, not women who feel the need to prove how smart they are. I let that sentence sit in the room without responding. I'd learned over 17 years that some comments were better absorbed than fought. We married young. I was 25, working compliance risk assessments for companies expanding into Latin America and Europe. I could read a balance sheet the way other people read faces, and I could catch a lie buried 3 clauses deep in a contract written in a language my husband couldn't even order dinner in. Then my mother had a stroke, our daughter Lily was still in diapers, and Marcus said the words every ambitious man says to the woman holding his life together: "We're a team." Take care of things for a few years, and when my career stabilizes, you go back to work. A few years became nearly a decade. He never once wondered how fluent I really was, because he never thought to wonder about me at all. The dinner started politely enough. Diego was courteous but guarded, a man who watched more than he spoke. He seemed uncomfortable every time Marcus refilled my wine glass a little too eagerly. Marcus talked big projections, timelines, numbers that didn't quite match what I'd glimpsed on his desk at home months earlier. Diego asked about patent ownership, about certifications. Marcus's answer wandered, vague and rehearsed, and then the moment his English started failing him, he slipped into Spanish. He thought it made him safe. He leaned toward Diego, voice low, casual, like men trading a joke between themselves. "Don't worry about her," he said. "Tonight, she's yours. Sign the agreement in the morning." Diego set his glass down and told him flatly he'd never asked for anything like that. Marcus pressed on anyway. "I know what men like us have to do to close a deal like this. She'll listen. She always listens." I didn't flinch. I didn't drop my fork or gasp. I set my wine down, smiled the way I'd smiled at 100 dinners just like this one, and said in calm English, "Excuse me, I need to use the ladies' room." Marcus didn't even look up. I walked away with my heels steady on the marble floor and my pulse steadier than it had any right to be. In the bathroom, I locked myself into a private stall and called a number I hadn't dialed in 6 years. Marcus thought I was in there crying. I was calling the one person who could end his deal before it ever began. Her name was Camilla Molina, Diego's older sister, and the person who actually controlled the family's investment fund. Years earlier, I'd worked a compliance review on a Molina Capital deal in Bogota, back when I still had a career. I'd found a chain of shell companies buried in the paperwork that would have cost the family millions if it had gone unnoticed. Camilla remembered that. She remembered me. "I'm having dinner with your brother," I told her, my voice low against the cold of the stall door. "My husband just offered me to him in exchange for a signature on an investment contract. Silence stretched. Then, carefully, did my brother agree to this? No, Diego refused. But my husband said something else, that the certifications were just a formality, that they'd be sorted out after the money transferred. That got her attention faster than the first part had. Camilla was in the hotel, one floor down, preparing for tomorrow's meeting. She told me to go back to the table, keep the call connected in my pocket, and let her listen. I straightened my dress and walked back into the dining room like nothing had happened. Marcus asked if I was okay. I said I'd felt lightheaded. He nodded, already turning back to Diego, already boasting in Spanish that I was easy to manage, that I didn't understand the first thing about business. I let the words wash over me and reached for my water glass, tipping it just enough to spill onto the tablecloth, an excuse to bend down and tap the recording app on my phone. Diego's patience was thinning. "Don't bring your wife into this," he said, flat and final. Marcus barely paused. "Everyone has a price. Hers is just attention." That was the moment the door opened. Camilla walked in with the fund's legal counsel a step behind her. In Spanish, she said, "It seems I've arrived at exactly the right moment." Marcus turned. I watched the color drain from his face as he did the math. This wasn't a social visit. Camilla held 52% of the voting shares. Without her signature, there was no $18 million. She sat beside me and switched to English. "You said the certifications could be handled later." "Explain that." Marcus denied it smoothly, blaming translation, nuance lost between languages. That was when I spoke, for the first time all night, in perfect, unhurried Spanish. There was no nuance. "You said exactly that the certifications were a formality. Then you said I would listen, because I always listen." Marcus went completely still. Camilla didn't kill the deal on the spot. She announced a 72-hour hold pending independent review, which was worse for Marcus than an outright rejection. It meant someone was looking for something specific. The drive home was silent, except for his fury simmering beneath a controlled surface. He accused me of humiliating him. "What humiliated you?" I asked. "The fact that I understand Spanish, or what you actually said." He pivoted instead toward fear dressed as reason. "We could lose the house. Lily might not have money for college." He told me to call Camilla in the morning and smooth it over. I told him I needed to sleep on it. He believed, in that particular way men like him always believe, that he still had time to talk me back into agreement. But what happened that night completely changed how I saw the last 17 years. Once his breathing settled, I checked my credit report by the blue light of my phone in the dark bathroom. 3 business loans, $1.4 million combined, all in my name. I had never signed for any of them. I made coffee the next morning like it was any other day, giving him nothing to suspect. "I'll call Camilla," I said, stirring slowly. "But first I need to understand exactly what I'm supposed to say." Relief moved through him, almost embarrassing to watch. He launched into his rehearsed explanation, a joke that landed wrong, Diego's fault as much as the wine's. I apologized for overreacting. He left for work convinced I'd folded. The moment his car pulled away, I called Renee Walsh, a friend from another life, now a fraud litigation attorney sharp enough to make people nervous in depositions. She gave me a list before I'd even finished explaining. "Don't sign anything. Change every password. Freeze my credit. Find out if there were accounts registered under my name that I didn't know about." We found the loans first, 3 of them, structured as collateral for Marcus's project. If the deal closed, he could quietly pay them off before I noticed. If it collapsed, I'd be the one holding $1.5 million in debt I never agreed to. Then Renee found the contract. My signature, not close, identical, lifted from paperwork we'd filed together 3 years earlier when we refinanced the house. One document listed me as co-founder and financial guarantor of something I had never heard of in my life. That night, once Marcus was asleep, I opened the small safe in his closet, the one he never talked about. I knew the code, his late father's birthday, the same 4 digits he used for half his passwords. Inside, copies of my ID and passport, a power of attorney I never signed, loan guarantees with my name typed neatly at the bottom, and 2 versions of the same equipment testing report. One showed the device had passed certification cleanly. The other, the real one, showed a failure rate well above what any hospital board would accept. At the bottom of the folder was a life insurance policy, $2 million, my name on it. Marcus, listed as primary beneficiary, purchased 6 months earlier, right around the time the loans had started. Renee was careful not to let me spiral. A policy alone proved nothing. But combined with the forged documents and the debt, it painted a picture of a man constructing a system where I absorbed all the risk and he collected all the reward. I lay awake, replaying small moments that suddenly wore a different meaning. The doctor his insurance company had specifically recommended. The offhand questions about my blood pressure asked one too many times. The joke he'd made once at a dinner party that if I died, he'd at least stop worrying about Lily's tuition. I didn't know, not with certainty, whether Marcus intended real harm or simply saw the policy as another form of collateral. But I knew I couldn't keep sleeping beside him without protecting myself either way. If I had known what was still coming, I might have run that same night. Instead, Renee laid out a plan. Shield me from financial liability, prove the forgery, find out who inside Summit had helped him bury the truth. I had to keep playing the wife trying to save the deal, giving him nothing to suspect. Then Marcus texted. Someone from the company was coming by that evening with a confirmation letter. Renee told me to let him bring it. He arrived with Trevor Banks, a junior legal manager with a nervous habit of clicking his pen. The letter stated that I had known about and consented to the loans, that any confusion at the Ashford dinner had simply been the wine talking. I photographed every page, sent them to Renee, and told Marcus I wanted my old friend the lawyer to review it first. I didn't sign. Buried in the paperwork was a name I recognized, Priya Anand, the project's former financial director, who'd approved the first budget draft before her name vanished from every recent report. Marcus had once mentioned dismissively that she'd quit without notice. Renee's investigator tracked her down. Priya refused to talk at first. She'd signed an NDA, taken a severance payout. I sent her one line myself. Marcus used my name to guarantee numbers you refused to sign off on. She agreed to meet within the hour. What she told us reframed everything. The device had failed an independent inspection. Marcus had asked her to adjust the failure rate. When she refused, he threatened to expose a minor accounting error from her own file. Some of the investment money had already moved through a consulting firm called Whitfield Consulting Group, registered under my name, at a P.O. box Marcus had rented months ago. He wasn't just forging my signature. He was using my identity as a wall between himself and money that shouldn't exist. Before leaving the company, Priya had quietly copied everything. Emails demanding the report be altered, the original spreadsheet, meeting notes where Marcus said plainly, "Once the money's in the account, nobody cares about the first version." She agreed to hand it all to Renee on the condition she'd be legally protected. That night Priya sent one more file, a recording from a meeting months earlier. Marcus's voice, unmistakable, telling Trevor, "If Elena finds out, just tell her she already signed it." After 17 years, nobody's going to believe a housewife over a VP. I listened to it twice in the dark kitchen. Then I called Renee. "Now," I said, "I want him to say that again, to my face." Renee booked a small conference room at her firm under a consulting company's name. One with a clearly posted notice that audio and video could be recorded on the premises. I texted Marcus that I was ready to sign, but wanted to understand how I'd be protected. He answered within minutes, eager, believing his wife had finally come around. I walked in playing every part of the frightened, compliant woman he expected. I let my voice tremble over the house, over Lily's tuition. Marcus softened instantly into his patient, condescending tone. "You don't understand business. You just need to trust me." I asked why my name was on the loans. "Banks trust a family business more." "It was just a formality. And my signature. I signed for you. You always sign what I hand you anyway." I asked what would happen if something went wrong. He smiled and said, "Only if the deal fails. And it won't as long as you do your part." I asked what my part was. That was when he admitted it, casual as ordering coffee. He'd thought Diego might be drawn to me, thought it would make him look generous. I didn't actually mean for anything to happen. I just needed him to believe I'd do whatever it took, including offering your wife to him. His patience cracked. "Don't turn this into some moral thing. This is $18 million. The plainest confession of what I'd always suspected, but never had proof of, that, to Marcus, I had always been worth less than the number on a contract. He kept talking, admitting the report only needed to exist long enough for the money to transfer, that afterward they'd quietly switch suppliers, that the hospitals already using the device weren't in real danger. It was just how the numbers get presented. He admitted Priya had been pushed out for not being flexible. Every sentence out of his mouth was another nail, and he didn't even notice he was building his own coffin. I slid the unsigned letter across the table and asked if he'd write, in his own hand, that he'd previously had my permission to sign for me. He laughed. "I'm not stupid enough to put that in writing." "That's fine," I said. "You just said enough." He looked around the room, saw the recording notice by the door, and the blood drained from his face exactly the way it had at that first dinner. Only this time, there was no Diego to soften it. He demanded my phone. I didn't move. Renee walked in with a security officer behind her, informing him calmly that he wasn't permitted to approach me and that the bank had already been notified of suspected forgery. He pivoted to threats I was destroying Lily's future. "No," I said. "You already put her future on falsified debt. I'm just stopping you from finishing the job." At the door, he turned back. "Nobody at that company is going to believe you." Renee looked at me once he was gone. "Then let's give him a room full of people who are done staying quiet." The next morning, Camilla called. The $18 million signing ceremony was still scheduled, but it wouldn't be a signing anymore. It would be a board hearing, and Marcus had no idea it was coming. He believed he'd won. He put on his best suit, rehearsed a speech in the mirror, and texted me before he left. "After today, I'll decide if this marriage is even worth saving." I didn't answer. The hearing was held at Summit's headquarters. Gerald Finch, chairman of the board, sat at the head of the table. Diego and Camilla arrived with legal counsel and a bank representative. Marcus came in with Trevor trailing behind him. Renee and I waited in an adjoining room with Priya. Marcus opened with growth projections, talk of ethics and responsibility to patients, calling the project the future of healthcare with a straight face that almost impressed me even now. When he finished, Gerald asked legal to confirm the paperwork was in order. Before anyone could answer, Camilla asked for clarity on the ownership of Whitfield Consulting Group. Marcus said it was his wife's company. Gerald asked if I was involved in management. Without missing a beat, Marcus said I was fully aware and had consented to everything. That was my cue. I walked in. "I have never operated Whitfield Consulting Group," I said. "I have never received $1 from it, and I have never signed a single guarantee tied to it." Marcus recovered fast, telling the room this was personal, not professional. Renee stepped forward with the folder she'd built. Forensic signature analysis. Registration records tied to an email account he controlled. Upload logs from his own office computer. My credit report. The wire transfers. Page after page. Marcus turned on Trevor, said he'd only followed instructions. Trevor, pale and sweating, insisted he hadn't known the signatures were forged. Then Priya walked in and confirmed everything: the pressure to falsify the report, the threats, the transfers into the company bearing my name. Marcus called her a disgruntled former employee. She said nothing. She simply pressed play on the recording, and his own voice filled the room, saying nobody would believe a housewife over a vice president. The silence that followed had weight to it. Gerald looked directly at him. "Is the housewife you're referring to the same woman currently standing in this room?" Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't. Then Renee played the conference room recording, every admission laid bare in his own voice. Diego stood and told the board he had never asked for or accepted anything involving me as part of any arrangement. Camilla announced Molina Capital was withdrawing entirely and forwarding every document to regulators. Marcus's composure finally broke. He pleaded that I'd misunderstood, that everything he'd done was for our family, that the company would collapse, that hundreds of employees could lose their jobs. "You didn't build this for the family," I told him. "You used the family as collateral." Gerald ordered his phone and building access revoked on the spot. Security escorted him out. Trevor was suspended before the door closed. On his way out, Marcus turned back one last time. "After everything I gave you, this is how you repay me." "You didn't give me a life," I said. "You built a cage and called it protection." Security blocked him before he could step closer. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I watched the man I had once loved get walked out of the room he believed would be his greatest triumph. When the door shut, Renee leaned toward me. "This isn't over. He still owns half the house. He still has access to accounts." I looked down at the divorce filing already sitting in my bag, papers I'd prepared days earlier, waiting for exactly this moment. "Not for much longer," I said. In the weeks that followed, the consequences moved fast. Marcus was terminated from Summit for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The company self-reported to regulators. Every loan tied to his name, and mine was frozen. A forensic handwriting review cleared me of liability once the forgeries were confirmed. Whitfield Consulting Group was dissolved. Prosecutors opened a formal investigation. Trevor cooperated in exchange for a reduced charge. Priya was compensated, her reputation restored. Molina Capital walked away from the deal, but Camilla stayed close enough to help Summit rebuild the project under a safer, honest process. I won't pretend Marcus faced immediate, dramatic justice. That's not how these things actually go. The legal process was slow and unglamorous, the way real consequences usually are. The divorce was its own battle. I filed for a temporary restraining order. No access to the house, no moving assets, no contact with Lily outside a lawyer's presence. Marcus tried, predictably, to turn our daughter against me, telling her I'd destroyed the family. I didn't retaliate by handing her every ugly detail. I gave her only what a 16-year-old needed to carry. "Your father made some very dangerous decisions," I told her at our kitchen table. "I'm not asking you to pick a side. I'm asking you to understand that staying quiet doesn't always hold a family together." She was angry at first, confused. But once she saw the parts of the case appropriate for her age, something in her shifted. She stopped seeing it as her mother's revenge and started seeing it for what it actually was. I sold the house once the settlement cleared. It had never really felt like mine. Every room decorated to impress people Marcus wanted something from. I moved into a smaller townhouse near Lily's school, modest, quiet, entirely my own. There was no windfall waiting on the other side of that courtroom. I had to rebuild my credit from nothing, refile years of mishandled tax paperwork, and step back into a job market I'd been absent from for a decade, sitting somewhere underneath all of it, with the quiet discomfort of realizing how many warning signs I'd let pass, because believing him had always been easier than questioning him. Camilla, true to her word, connected me with a healthcare compliance firm looking for someone with exactly my background. I didn't get the job out of pity. I sat through interviews, took a technical assessment, competed against candidates half my age. I earned the position the same way I'd earned everything before Marcus convinced me to set it aside. I started part-time. Within months, I was leading the risk investigation team. A few months after the hearing, Marcus requested a meeting through our attorneys to finalize the plea and asset division. He looked smaller across that table, the confidence gone. "I just need you to trust me one more time," he said. "I trusted you for 17 years," I told him. "Trust was never what you were missing." He asked quietly if I'd ever actually loved him. "I loved the man I thought you were," I said. "I won't keep sacrificing for the one you chose to become." I signed the papers. I stood up. I walked out without looking back. Sometimes I think about that dinner at the Ashford, the exact moment my marriage actually ended. It wasn't the divorce filing. It wasn't the courtroom. It was a restaurant table, chandeliers overhead, my husband speaking a language he assumed I didn't understand. But the moment that mattered most wasn't his sentence at all. It was mine, the choice not to react the way he expected. I didn't beg. I didn't make a scene. I didn't warn him. I listened. And for the first time in longer than I could admit, I trusted what I heard with my own ears more than I trusted his explanation for it. They say a marriage ends the day the papers are signed. That wasn't true for me. Mine ended at a dinner table in a language my husband thought I couldn't hear. But my life didn't end there. It started again. Because the moment a man decides your dignity is a fair price for his ambition, you stop owing him the job of protecting his dreams. You start protecting yourself. What would you have done if you heard your husband say those words? Would you have confronted him right at the table, or waited the way I did, until you had enough proof to make it undeniable? Tell me in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from tonight. If Alina's story gave you something to sit with, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. We have so many more stories like this one waiting for you.